I'm knackered. I haven't had a proper drink of water for over 3 days. My rations ran out yesterday, and there ain't many of us left. We've just come under attack from Stukas, which have damaged some bedfoods, so it looks like walking it is. At the outbreak of war in September 1939, our battalion were in India. We had earned a high reputation in the Northwest Frontier Campaign in 1937. For the first 2 years of the war, we remained in Cawnpore on international security duty. But then, in November 1941, our battalion had its orders to sail for Iraq. When we arrived, our job was to guard and protect the oil fields against a possible attack from Jerry, which were then sweeping their way across Russia and towards our direction. But thank God this never materialised. In late May 1942, the battalion received orders to make our way with a gruelling overland trip to Libya. Our role was to take part in a great German-Italian offensive against Egypt. We were there to help hold back the Jerry push. We had heard about Rommel, the Desert Fox, and how he was playing with our own generals by giving them bloody noses from Benghazi and all the way back to Tobruk, where only last year there was a heroic defence by a mixed bag of units which had been cut off from another offensive by Rommel. This was a mixed bag of Aussies, British, Polish, Czech and other units, and they held firm until relieved by a counterattack. We had travelled 1,600 miles overland from Iraq. It was not the most pleasant of rides, and the dust and sand was constantly a pain to our breathing and the transport. When we arrived at a place called El Douda, I can tell you. Then, on the 16th of June, we got off the Bedfords. We were told we were now going to be part of the 20th Indian Infantry Brigade of the 10th Indian Division. We were to be alongside the 1st, 6th Raptuna Rifles were at Sidi Regaza, and the 3rd, 18th Royal Gawal Rifles of El Douda. As we got our kit together, the corporal came over to me and some of the lads. He said, "Our forces have been routed by Jerry, and we are now in full withdrawal. The British Army never retreats, but withdraws. Orders have been given for us to defend our area, which has now been called the Box, to the last man." We all looked at each other. The situation seemed dire. We had just driven all this way, and now we were to defend a bit of sunburnt, dust-ridden, sun-baked land from Jerry. On the order given, we began digging in. Slit trenches and communication pits were dug. We were sweating all the time in the heat. The CO then sent our transport away, and on seeing the dust clouds of the wheels disappear into the distance, we prepared ourselves for the siege. All the training does not prepare you for your own personal thoughts, and the thought of waiting here knowing that the chances of being strafed or dive bombed before the German armour comes pouring over us is not a pleasant one. You do start to think of home and whether I would see my hometown ever again. I looked at a photo of my missus and gave the photo a little kiss. I then placed it back in my AB-64 paybook. I'd been buttoned up my chest pocket. Early in the morning, we were coming under heavy mortar fire and machine gun fire as we were being probed by forward Jerry units checking our defences. I was so frightened, I'd forgotten to fire my SMLE, but just held on to my helmet in a fetal position in the slit as the bombs dropped all around me. At midday, the Jerry infantry was spotted by our forward observation post. While gaining my composure, I could hear orders being bellowed out to a 2-pounder anti-tank platoon, which were not far from our position, to open fire. These then engaged the enemy and a toing and froing of shelling started. All afternoon, I and the lads were subjected to sporadic shelling all around us. I could then hear, from my rear, a loud roaring sound of engine, planes, flying in fast at speed. I looked up, and to my relief, 2 Harry bombers, which are converted Hurricanes, and a Kitty Hawk came over my head and straight towards Jerry. The platoon sergeant, who was looking through his glasses, binoculars, was shouting, "Go on, lads!" He later told us these planes were attacking Jerry troop carriers and ammunition lorries. And from what he could see, the damage was terrible. He did say to me, "Don't worry, lad, there's still enough Jerry for all of us to deal with." From the safety of my slit, I could see at around 17:30 or 5:30, Sidi Regaza was being heavily shelled. The attacks continued throughout the night. Flares and shelling were lighting up the clear night sky. It was like seeing a firework display. You could be forgiven to enjoying seeing the sight if you didn't know death was to come as it landed. Throughout the night, the shelling continued. Then a signaller, who had just run out of the CO's pit, stopped and shouted, "The Rajput positions have just been overrun. Many of the Indian boys have been taken prisoner. The rest of them are withdrawing to Bel Hamed defences." Then earlier this morning, the 17th of June, our battalion positions were now coming under sporadic dive bombing and shell fire. Fortunately, no casualties at this time have been reported, thank God. At 19:30 or 7:30, the order was coming around each slit that we are being ordered to withdraw. Although this surprised us, I wasn't going to argue. I got getting with my kit ready. We are to move 70 miles east to a place called Solam. We made a textbook but hastily withdrawal. In the dark, noise was kept to a minimum. We were having to march back 10 miles, and in doing so, we were looking for the Bedfords, which are to transport us. On looking, no vehicle was to be found. Some of the lads started cursing the drivers. One of the officers was sent out by Lieutenant Colonel Matthews, our CO, to reconnoitre and find our transport. Word just come round, that officer has just been captured by Jerry before he could make his route back. Before moving off, in now unfamiliar ground, I was made aware Major GPG De Winton and Lieutenant TM Stevens are to stay behind as rear guard to cover our withdrawal. This rear guard, for which no transport could be made available, was composed entirely of volunteers. I felt a lump in my throat on seeing them, as they knew before volunteering that their only future was going to be death or capture. The rest of us moved off for Solam. It was not until 03:30 that the transport was located, all to the relief of all of us. We all got in the back of the Bedfords and what other mishmash of vehicles that were present. By now, I hadn't slept for many hours, and I was fighting to stay awake. Corp shouted out, "Get your heads down, lads, try and catch up on some shut-eye." He didn't need to repeat himself, I was gone. About an hour in, I was awakened by nervous voices all around me. Jerry had appeared to have outflanked us, and tanks were blocking our route on the road. With no hope whatsoever of moving forward, we started coming under fire from not only machine gun fire from the tanks, but also shelling. Next thing, it was clear the CO had made a decision to move. I felt the lorry then turn off the road. I knew we'd been trying to outflank the Jerry tanks, and we're heading south. The only issue I could see with this was that we were heading straight into the desert. For several hours, we were running a gauntlet of continuous and murderous fire from all sides. I could see from our tailgate of the lorry some Bedfords, around which had lads in, were taking direct hits and turning into fireballs. Screams could be heard before utter silence. I was quietly shaking, but I couldn't show it. I could hear our driver screaming out, "What's going on? I have no contact with anyone. Where are we going?" I could see many of our vehicles getting lost in the melee. We continued to run the threat of being blown up with shells dropping everywhere. Only a few lorries, which included mine, kept up with the CO. As the shelling was stopping, we reached Sollum. It was 7 hours of driving behind the forward Jerry units. At the time of reaching Sollum, we have lost most of our battalion. Over a short time, we were joined by a few stragglers. We have lost more than 500 officers and men. Most of them, I've been told, have been taken prisoner. Only 4 officers and 100 of us other ranks have made it. We've been joined here and then by other units, and by now we're going to be given orders to withdraw further. We are either walking, hitching rides, or commandeering anything we can find. All night long we moved back towards El Alamein. The road was choked up in daylight. We are being attacked by Jerry planes. I've lost count on how many times I've had to dive into the stones and sand, fighting to cover myself up, to stop myself from being hit. To make things worse, I haven't seen one of our own planes for some time now. We eventually passed through El Alamein, where we all finally halted the German advance. Our orders have now come through. We are to move to Cairo and to a rest area. Our battalion is licking its wounds. By the time we are to reach our rest area, we are only going to muster 15 officers and 300 other ranks. Our battalion has been annihilated. I now wait here for transport to take us back. The rest of the remnants of the 1st South Wales Borderers was sent to Cyprus in case of an expected German invasion. In mid-August 1942, it came a great shock to the boys of the battalion that the regiment was to be disbanded due to the annihilation. The survivors were to be transferred to the 1st King's Own Royal Regiment. A small cadre of men were then sent back to Blighty to become part of the 4th Battalion Monmouthshire Regiment, which in December 1942 then became the 1st South Wales Borderers. Of the old regiment, the identity was to be kept alive in captivity. Around 10 officers and about 100 men were interned at Chetty POW camp in southeastern Italy, while a further body of men was situated in a camp at Sulmona, some 30 miles away. The 2 sets of the regiment joined up in September 1943 when the Chetty camp was transferred to Sulmona. At the end of that month, a mass escape was made by boys of the South Wales Borderers, together with groups from other units. Of these, 4 officers and some 30 men of the old 1st South Wales Borderers succeeded in regaining their freedom. The remainder were either recaptured and sent to prison camps in Germany or killed, as were Captain W. Wright and Lieutenant J. Tidy and the men with them.